Dialectic, it may be added, is no novelty in philosophy. Among the ancients, Plato is termed the inventor of dialectic, and his right to the name rests on the fact that the Platonic philosophy first gave the free scientific and thus at the same time objective form to dialectic. Socrates, as we should expect from the general character of his philosophizing, has the dialectical element in a predominantly subjective shape, that of irony. He used to turn his dialectic first against ordinary consciousness, and then especially against the sophists. In his conversations, he used to simulate the wish for some clearer knowledge about the subject under discussion, and after putting all sorts of questions with that intent, he drew on those with whom he conversed the opposite of what their first impressions had pronounced correct. If, for instance, the sophists claimed to be teachers, Socrates, by a series of questions, forced the sophist Protagoras to confess that all learning is only recollection. In his more strictly scientific dialogues, Plato employs the dialectical method to show the finitude of all hard and fast terms of understanding. Thus in the Parmenides he deduces the many from the one, and shows nevertheless that the many cannot but define itself as the one. In this grand style did Plato treat dialectic. In modern times it was, more than any other, Kant who resuscitated the name of dialectic and restored it to its post of honour. He did it, as we have seen, by working on the antinomies of reason. The problem of these antinomies is no more subjective piece of work oscillating between one set of grounds and another. It really serves to show that every abstract proposition of understanding, taken precisely as it is given, naturally veers round into its opposite. However reluctant understanding may be to admit the action of dialectic, we must not suppose that the recognition of its existence is peculiarly confined to the philosopher. It would be truer to say that dialectic gives expression to a law which is felt in other grades of consciousness and in general experience. Everything that surrounds us may be viewed as an instance of dialectic. We are aware that everything finite, instead of being stable and ultimate, is rather changeable and transient, and this is exactly what we mean by the dialectic of the finite, by which the finite, as implicitly other than what it is forced beyond its own immediate or natural being to turn suddenly into its opposite. We have before this identified understanding with what is implied in the popular idea of the goodness of God. We may now remark of the dialectic in the same objective signification that its principle answers to the idea of his power. All things, we say, that is the finite world as such, are doomed, and in saying so we have a vision of dialectic as the universal and irresistible power before which nothing can stay, however secure and stable it may deem itself. The category of power does not, it is true, exhaust the depth of the divine nature or the notion of God, but it certainly forms a vital element in all religious consciousness. Apart from this general objectivity of dialectic, we find traces of its presence in each of the particular provinces and phases of the natural and spiritual world. Take as an illusion the motion of the heavenly bodies. At this moment the planet stands in this spot, but implicitly it is the possibility of being in another spot, and that possibility of being otherwise the planet brings into existence by moving. Similarly, the physical elements prove to be dialectical. The process of the meteorological action is the exhibition of their dialectic. It is the same dynamic that lies at the root of every other natural process, and as it were, forces nature out of itself. To illustrate the presence of dialectic in the spiritual world, especially in the provinces of law and morality, we have only to recollect how general experience shows us the extreme of one state or another suddenly shifting into its opposite. A dialectic which is recognized in many ways in common proverbs, thus summa jus summa injuria, which means that to drive an abstract right to its extremity is to do a wrong. In political life, as everyone knows, extreme anarchy and extreme despotism naturally lead to one another. The perception of dialectic in the province of individual ethics is seen in well-known adages. Pride comes before a fall. Too much wit outwits itself. Even feeling, bodily as well as mental, has its dialectic. Everyone knows how the extremes of pain and pleasure pass into each other. The heart overflowing with joy seeks relief in tears, and the deepest melancholy will at times betray its presence by a smile. Skepticism should not be looked upon merely as a doctrine of doubt. It would be more correct to say that the skeptic has no doubt of his point, which is the nothingness of all finite existence. He who only doubts still clings to the hope that his doubt may be resolved, or that one or other of the definite views, between which he always wavers, will turn out solid and true. Skepticism, properly so called, is a very different thing. It is complete hopelessness about all which understanding counts stable. The feeble to which it gives birth is one of unbroken calmness and inward repose. Such at least is the noble skepticism of antiquity, especially as exhibited in the writings of Sextus Empiricus. when in the later times of Rome it had been systematized as complement to the dogmatic systems of Stoic and Epicurean. Of far other stamp, and to be strictly distinguished from it, is the modern Skepticism already mentioned, which partly preceded the critical philosophy and partly sprung out of it. That later Skepticism consisted solely in denying the truth and certitude of the supersensible, and in pointing to the fact of sense and immediate sensation as what we have to keep to. Even to this day, Skepticism is often spoken of as the irresistible enemy of all positive knowledge, and hence of philosophy insofar as philosophy is concerned with positive knowledge. But in these statements there is a misconception. It is only the finite thought of abstract understanding which has to fear skepticism, because, unable to withstand it, philosophy includes the skeptical principle as subordinate function of its own, in the shape of dialectic. In contradistinction to mere skepticism, however, philosophy does not remain content with the purely negative result of dialectic. The skeptic mistakes the true value of his result when he supposes it to be no more than a negation pure and simple. For the negative which emerges as the result of dialectic is, because a result, at the same time the positive. It contains what it results from, absorbed into itself and made part of its own nature. Thus conceived, however, the dialectical stage has the features characterizing the third grade of logical truth. The speculative stage, or stage of positive reason, apprehends the unity of terms, propositions, in their opposition, the affirmative which is involved in their disintegration and in their transition. 1. The result of dialectic is positive because it has a definite content, or because its result is not empty and abstract nothing, but the negation of certain specific propositions which are contained in the result, for the very reason that it is a resultant and not an immediate nothing. It follows from this that the reasonable result, though it be only a thought and abstract, is still concrete, being in not plain formal unity, but unity of distinct propositions. Bare abstractions or formal thoughts are therefore no business of philosophy, which has to deal only with concrete thoughts. The logic of mere understanding is involved in speculative logic, and can at will be elicited from it by the process of omitting the dialectical and reasonable element. When that is done, it becomes what the common logic is, a descriptive collection of sundry thought forms and rules which, finite though they are taken by something infinite. If we consider only what it contains, and not how it contains it, the true reason world, so far from being the exclusive property of philosophy, is the right of every human being on whatever grade of culture or mental growth he may stand, which would justify man's ancient title of rational being. The general mode by which experience first makes us aware of the reasonable order of things is by accepted and unreasoned belief, and the character of the rational, as already noted, is to be unconditioned and thus to be self-contained, self-determining. In this sense, man above all things becomes aware of the reasonable order. When he knows of God, he knows him to be the completely self-determined. Similarly, the consciousness a citizen has of his country and its laws is a perception of the reason world, so long as he looks up to them as unconditioned and likewise universal powers to which he must subject his individual will. And in the same sense, the knowledge and will of the child is rational, when he knows his parents' will and wills it. Now, to turn these rational, of course positively rational realities into speculative principles, the only thing needed is that they be thought. The expression speculation in common life is often used with a very vague and at the same time secondary sense, as when we speak of a matrimonial or commercial speculation. By this we only mean two things. First, that what is immediately at hand has to be past and left behind, and secondly that the subject matter of such speculations, though in the first place only subjective, must not remain so, but be realized or translated into objectivity.